The morning sun filtered through the gossamer curtains of Elderbrook Manor, casting dancing shadows across Amara's dressing table. Her reflection stared back at her, dark eyes wide with anticipation, caramel skin glowing with pre-wedding radiance, and long black hair cascading down her back like a silk waterfall. In just a few hours she would become Mrs. Xavier Bennet, a thought that made her heart flutter like a caged butterfly. "Hold still." Miss Amara, came the stern voice of Madame Viper, the chief maid's fingers working through her hair with practiced precision. Every strand must be perfect for your special day. Something in her tone made Amara's skin prickle, though she couldn't quite say why. Madame Viper had arrived at the manor 6 months ago, seemingly out of nowhere, with impeccable references and an almost supernatural ability to anticipate every need. She was tall and elegant, with high cheekbones and eyes the color of jade, though they sometimes appeared to shift like scales in certain lights. Her silver-streaked black hair was always pulled back in a severe bun, and her movements were fluid, almost hypnotic. "You're very kind to help so much with the preparations," Madame Viper Amara said softly, watching as the older woman's fingers wove intricate patterns in her hair. "I don't know what I would have done without you." A smile curved Madame Viper's thin lips, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, my dear, helping brides is my specialty." The manor buzzed with activity around them. Servants scurried through the halls carrying flowers, linens, and countless other wedding necessities. The air was thick with the scent of fresh-baked pastries and blooming roses. Through the window, Amara could see the garden where workers were setting up rows of white chairs beneath an arch of climbing vines. Miss Rose, a small voice called from the doorway. 10-year-old Lucy, the gardener's daughter, stood there clutching a handful of wildflowers. "I picked these for your bouquet, just like you asked." Amara's face lit up. "They're perfect, Lucy. Come here." She beckoned the girl closer, ignoring Madame Viper's disapproving click of the tongue. Lucy bounded over, her freckled face beaming. "Will you still teach me to read after you're married, Miss Rose?" "Of course, sweetheart." Every Tuesday, just like always, Amara took the flowers, breathing in their sweet fragrance. This was exactly why the village had fallen in love with her. Her kindness knew no social boundaries. Since arriving in Elderbrook 3 years ago to work as the local school teacher, she had transformed the community with her generous spirit. She taught reading to the servants' children in her spare time, nursed the elderly through last winter's fever, and even used her modest savings to help the baker's family rebuild after a fire. It was during that reconstruction that she first met Xavier Bennet, the wealthy young architect who had inherited the manor. He had been so moved by her selflessness that he joined the reconstruction effort himself, working alongside the villagers, despite his status. Their love had bloomed like the roses in his mother's garden, pure and natural. Madame Viper's fingers suddenly pulled too tight, making Amara wince. "My apologies," the maid murmured, though there was a strange tension in her voice. "Speaking of Mr. Bennet, he was quite the eligible bachelor before you arrived, wasn't he? So many broken hearts in his wake." "I wouldn't know," Amara replied carefully. Xavier never spoke much about his past relationships. No, Madame Viper's reflection showed a flash of something dark crossing her features. How interesting. Men can be so selective about their memories. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Lucy, sensing the shift, quietly excused herself with a curtsy. As the morning wore on, more subtle barbs fell from Madame Viper's lips like drops of poison. Comments about Xavier's wealth, insinuations about Amara's humble background, questions about whether true love could bridge such a gap. Each remark was delivered with perfect servile politeness, yet laden with undercurrents of malice. By noon, Amara's nerves were as frayed as old lace. She stood before the full-length mirror as Madame Viper helped her into her wedding dress, an ethereal creation of silk and pearls that had belonged to Xavier's mother. "Such a lovely gown," Madame Viper observed, adjusting the bodice with unnecessary force. "Though perhaps a bit too fine for a village schoolteacher. I remember when his mother wore it. Such a grand lady she was. And such hopes she had for her son's marriage." Amara met the maid's eyes in the mirror. "Madame Viper, is there something you wish to tell me?" The older woman paused, her hands resting on Amara's shoulders like pale spiders. For a moment, her carefully constructed mask slipped, revealing a glimpse of ancient pain and fury beneath. "Tell you," she laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, my dear girl, I could tell you so many things. About Xavier, about love, about betrayal." Her fingers tightened imperceptibly. "I could tell you how it feels to watch the man you love slip through your fingers like water, all because you weren't quite proper enough for his family." The truth hit Amara like a physical blow. You and Xavier. 5 years ago," Madame Vipera whispered, her voice thick with memory. "Before I was Madame Vipera, when I was simply Victoria, a lady's maid with dreams above her station. We loved each other, or so I thought. Until his mother intervened, and suddenly my darling Xavier discovered the importance of marrying within his class." Her lip curled. "But look at him now, marrying a common school teacher. I suppose times have changed." Amara's heart pounded against her ribs. "Why are you here?" Madame Vipera stepped back, smoothing her black dress with trembling hands. When she spoke again, her voice was once again perfectly controlled. "To serve, of course. To ensure everything is perfect for your special day." She moved toward the door, then paused. "Oh, and Miss Rose, do be careful with that dress. Transformations can be so unpredictable." She glided out, leaving Amara alone with her reflection and the chilling realization that her perfect day had been orchestrated by a woman with revenge in her heart. Through the window, church bells began to toll, calling the village to witness a wedding that would become legend, though not for the reasons anyone expected. In the distance, thunder rumbled, and the roses in the garden trembled as if in fear. Dark clouds gathered above Elderbrook Manor like spectators to a tragedy. The wedding guests shifted uneasily in their seats as thunder growled in the distance, though not a drop of rain fell. In the bride's chamber, Amara stood alone, her mother's silver locket clutched in trembling fingers, trying to shake off the growing sense of dread that had settled over her like a shroud. Meanwhile, in a locked room deep within the manor's servants' quarters, Madame Vipera knelt before a circle of black candles. Her severe bun had come undone, dark hair writhing around her face like serpents. Before her lay an ancient grimoire, its pages yellow with age, and a small cloth doll wearing a scrap of lace from Amara's wedding dress. "By scale and fang, by venom's bite," she whispered, her voice taking on an otherworldly resonance. "What walks on 2 legs shall crawl on none." She pressed a long, curved needle into the doll's heart. "Let love's kiss become poison, let warmth become cold, let her shed her human skin for scales of gold." The candles flickered green, and somewhere in the manor, a mirror cracked. In the manor's chapel, Xavier stood at the altar, handsome in his tailored suit, unaware of the darkness gathering around his joy. The wedding march began, its familiar notes somehow discordant in the heavy air. The doors opened, and Amara appeared, radiant despite her unease. Her white dress seemed to glow from within as she moved down the aisle, each step bringing her closer to both love and doom. Madame Vipera stood among the other servants, her jade eyes gleaming with barely suppressed triumph. As Amara passed, she began to whisper words in an ancient tongue, her lips barely moving. The temperature in the chapel plummeted. "Dearly beloved," the priest began, his voice echoing in the suddenly too quiet space. "We are gathered here today." A gasp from the audience interrupted him. Amara had begun to sway, her face draining of color. "Xavier," she whispered, reaching for him. "Something's wrong, I feel." Her words cut off in a choking sound. The bouquet fell from her hands, white roses scattering across the floor. Before the horrified eyes of the assembled guests, Amara's skin began to shimmer, taking on a golden, iridescent quality. Her fingers elongated, fusing together, becoming something else entirely. No, Xavier lunged forward, but it was too late. Where his bride had stood moments before, a massive python now coiled, its scales the exact shade of Amara's golden skin, its dark eyes holding the same terrified awareness of their human counterpart. The wedding dress lay in tatters around the serpentine form. Chaos erupted. Guests screamed and fled, their chairs toppling in their haste to escape. The priest fell backward, crossing himself repeatedly. Only Xavier remained frozen, staring in horror at the creature that had been his bride. The python Amara raised her head, tongue flicking out in distress. When she tried to speak, only a soft hiss emerged. She recoiled from her own sound, coils tightening in fear. "What sorcery is this?" Xavier demanded, his voice raw with anguish. He spun around, searching the panicked crowd. "Who has done this?" Laughter rang out, high and cruel. The fleeing guests parted like water as Madame Viper strode forward, her servile demeanor gone. She seemed taller now, more regal, power radiating from her like heat from a flame. "Oh, my darling Xavier," she purred, her voice carrying easily over the chaos. "Don't you recognize the handiwork of your first love?" Understanding dawned on his face. "Victoria." Once upon a time she moved closer, her black dress rippling like scales in shadow. "Before your mother decided a mere lady's maid wasn't good enough for her precious son. Before you chose status over love." Her smile was venomous. "But look at you now, trying to marry a common schoolteacher. It seems your standards have fallen quite far." The python that was Amara reared up, hissing in anger. Madame Viper laughed again. "How noble. Even as a serpent she tries to defend you. But tell me, Xavier, will you love her now? Will you kiss those scales? Share your bed with a cold-blooded creature?" She reached out to stroke his cheek with one long finger. "Perhaps you'll understand now how it feels to watch love transform into something monstrous." Xavier knocked her hand away. "Change her back," he demanded. "Victoria, please. This revenge you seek, I deserved it, not her." "Oh, but this is so much sweeter," Madame Viper crooned. "Watching you lose her, just as I lost you." Although her eyes glittered maliciously. "There might be a way to break the curse. True love's kiss, perhaps, but would you dare press your lips to a serpent?" The python swayed, Amara's consciousness clearly visible in those dark eyes. She moved toward Xavier, but he instinctively stepped back. The hurt in the snake's gaze was devastating. Madame Viper's triumph grew. "You see? Even now you recoil from imperfect love. Just as you did with me." She raised her arms, and her form began to shimmer and change. Her skin rippled, becoming iridescent scales of deepest green. Her face elongated, becoming serpentine, yet somehow maintaining its human beauty. "I am Vipera, Queen of the Serpent Court, and I sentence you both to know the pain of transformation." She was magnificent and terrible in her true form, half woman, half serpent, her lower body a massive coil of emerald scales, her upper body still humanoid but covered in fine, glittering scales. A crown of golden snakes writhed around her head like living hair. "The curse is cast, the deed is done," she declared. "Let all of Elderbrook remember this day, when true love proved as shallow as a summer puddle." She turned to the python. "Enjoy your new form, little teacher. Perhaps in time you'll learn to appreciate its power." With a gesture, she shattered every window in the chapel, sending shards of stained glass raining down like colored tears. As the guests cowered, she slithered toward the door, her scales making a soft, terrible sound against the stone floor. At the threshold, she paused and looked back at Xavier. "I've waited 5 years for this moment," she said, almost gently. 5 years to perfect this curse, to work my way into your household, to watch you fall in love again. Was it worth the wait?" "Oh, yes." Her forked tongue flicked out, tasting his despair. It was worth every second. She vanished in a swirl of green smoke, leaving behind only the echoes of her laughter and the soft sound of a python's heartbroken sobs. Xavier fell to his knees beside the coiled form of his transformed bride. His hand hovered over her scales, trembling, unable to touch. Around them, the scattered roses had withered to black, and the air was thick with the scent of dark magic and despair. Through the broken windows, the storm finally broke. Rain poured down, and lightning split the sky, illuminating the tableau of the grieving groom and his serpentine bride, a nightmare version of the wedding that should have been. The python's eyes met Xavier's, still Amara's eyes, still full of love and fear and desperate hope. But when she tried to speak his name, only a soft hiss emerged, and they both realized that this was only the beginning of their nightmare. Night fell over Elderbrook Manor like a funeral shroud. In what should have been the bridal suite, a python lay coiled on silk sheets, her golden scales gleaming in the moonlight. Though her body was serpentine, Amara's human consciousness remained trapped within, fighting against instincts that grew stronger with each passing hour. Must stay awake, she thought desperately, fighting the urge to seek warm rocks and small prey. Must remember who I am. She focused on memories, children's laughter in her classroom, the smell of chalk dust, Xavier's smile. But when she tried to recall the exact shade of his eyes, her snake brain responded with heat signatures instead of colors. In the Manor's library, Xavier hadn't slept in 3 days. Surrounded by ancient texts and magical treatises, his elegant clothes now wrinkled and stained with ink, he searched frantically for answers. Every book on serpents, every tome of transformation magic, every scroll of ancient curses lay open before him. There must be something, he muttered, running trembling fingers through his disheveled hair. Some way to break this curse. A soft hiss made him turn. Amara had followed him, her movements now gracefully fluid. She raised her head, nudging a book toward him with her snout. Even as a python, she was trying to help, to research, to maintain her teaching instincts. Xavier's heart clenched. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "This is all my fault. If I hadn't been such a coward 5 years ago." Amara's tongue flicked out, tasting his distress. She wanted to tell him it wasn't his fault. That love couldn't be forced, but all that emerged was another hiss. Frustrated, she knocked over an inkwell with her tail. A knock at the library door startled them both. Lucy, the gardener's daughter, stood there with tear-stained cheeks. "Mr. Bennet." "Miss Rose. I mean the python, she missed our reading lesson today." To everyone's surprise, Amara immediately slithered toward the girl. Lucy didn't flinch as the massive snake approached, instead reaching out to touch her scales gently. "You're still in there, aren't you, Miss Rose?" Lucy whispered. "Still wanting to teach, to help?" The python nodded, a heartbreakingly human gesture. "That's it," Xavier exclaimed, making them both jump. "Lucy, you're brilliant. Amara's still herself because she's holding on to what makes her human, her love of teaching, her desire to help others." He began pacing. "That's why the curse hasn't completely taken her mind. Her humanity is anchored in service to others, in genuine love. Like my grandmother always says," Lucy offered quietly, "real love is about giving, not taking." Xavier froze. "Your grandmother, isn't she the village elder? The one they say knows all the old magic?" An hour later, they sat in Elder Martha's cottage at the edge of the village. The old woman studied Amara through milky eyes that seemed to see more than just physical form. "Ah," she said finally, her weathered hands hovering over Amara's scales. "Queen Vipera's work. I haven't seen magic this dark since my own grandmother's time." "Can you break the curse?" Xavier asked desperately. Martha shook her head. "Such magic can only be broken by its opposite force. Vipera's curse was born of corrupted love, possessive, vengeful, selfish. Only its opposite can undo it. True love's kiss," Xavier suggested, hope rising. "No, child. Something deeper." The elder's eyes grew distant. "Vipera was once a guardian of sacred love, charged with protecting true bonds of the heart. But when your rejection poisoned her, she transformed her guardian's power into vengeance. Now she can only be defeated by a love that proves her wrong, a love that gives instead of takes, that sacrifices instead of demands." Amara's coils tightened as understanding dawned in her serpentine eyes. "But how?" Xavier pressed. "How do we prove that kind of love?" Martha looked between them sadly. "One of you must be willing to give up everything, not just risk it, but willingly surrender it for the other's happiness. And here's the cruel twist: you must do it expecting no reward, no restoration. The sacrifice must be genuine, with no hope of breaking the curse." Xavier straightened. "Then I'll give up everything. My wealth, my position." "No," Martha interrupted. "Material sacrifices won't suffice. The price must be paid in the coin of the heart." She turned to Amara. "And it must be freely chosen, not demanded." They left the cottage with heavy hearts, the path to salvation both clear and impossibly difficult. Back at the manor, Xavier began preparing for a confrontation with Vipera, gathering what magical protections he could. Amara watched him, her serpentine heart aching. She knew now what had to be done. The sacrifice required wasn't just of comfort or convenience, it was of identity itself. To break Vipera's curse of corrupted love, someone would have to prove that true love could survive even the most horrific transformation. That night, as Xavier finally succumbed to exhaustion in his study, Amara slithered to the mirror. Her reflection showed a magnificent python with scales like sunlight on water. Only her eyes remained unchanged, still human, still full of love and determination. I choose this, she thought firmly, fighting back her terror. If I must remain a python forever to prove that love transcends form, to free Xavier from this curse of guilt and pain, then I choose it. Not because I expect to be transformed back, but because his happiness matters more than my humanity. In that moment, something shifted in the air. In the distance, thunder rolled, and somewhere in the darkness, Queen Vipera stirred, sensing the gathering of a power she had forgotten existed, the strength of a love that asked nothing in return. The final confrontation approached, and with it, a test of love's true nature. As the moon rose over Elderbrook, both Python and Man prepared for a battle that would be fought not with fangs or fury, but with the ultimate power of sacrifice. The confrontation took place at midnight in the manor's garden, where withered roses marked the spot where love had turned to vengeance. Queen Vipera emerged from the shadows, her serpentine form gleaming like poisoned emeralds in the moonlight. "Have you come to beg for mercy, my love?" she asked Xavier, her voice a symphony of silk and scales. "Or perhaps to offer yourself in exchange for your precious bride's humanity?" Xavier stood his ground, though his heart hammered against his ribs. "Neither, Victoria. I've come to apologize." This caught her off guard. Her coils shifted uneasily. "Apologize? For being a coward 5 years ago? For letting my mother's prejudices override my heart? You deserved better." His voice cracked with genuine remorse. "But this curse, it doesn't punish me. It punishes an innocent woman whose only crime was loving purely." Amara slithered forward, positioning herself between them. Her golden scales caught the moonlight, creating a halo effect that made her appear almost divine. Vipera laughed bitterly. "And yet here she is, transformed into what you feared most, someone beneath your social station. How fitting that your new love should wear scales like I do." "You're wrong," Xavier said softly. "I never feared your station. I feared the depth of what I felt for you, the way it threatened everything I thought I knew about myself. But Amara," he glanced at the python, "she taught me that real love isn't about status or appearance. It's about the courage to give everything for another's happiness." Vipera's human features contorted with rage. "Pretty words, but empty. You'll never understand the pain of transformation, the agony of becoming something others fear." She lunged forward, her venomous fangs aimed at Xavier's throat. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Amara shot forward with impossible speed, wrapping her powerful coils around Vipera. But instead of crushing or attacking, she simply held her, the way one might embrace a grieving friend. Her dark eyes met Vipera's, and in them was not hatred or fear, but compassion. "What are you doing?" Vipera thrashed, trying to break free. "Fight me. Hate me." But Amara only tightened her embrace, not to harm but to comfort. In that moment she made her choice, not just to save Xavier, but to show Vipera that love could survive any transformation. Even if she remained a python forever, she would choose love over bitterness, compassion over vengeance. Something began to change in the air. A soft golden light emerged from Amara's scales, spreading outward like ripples in a pond. Where it touched Vipera, her emerald scales began to soften. "No," Vipera whispered, but her voice had lost its venom. "This isn't possible. Love doesn't. Love can't." "Love can," Xavier said gently, stepping forward to place one hand on Amara's coils and the other on Vipera's slowly transforming shoulder. "Love does. When it's real, it survives every change, every transformation." Amara proved that by choosing to remain a python forever, if it meant saving others from your pain. Tears began to fall from Vipera's eyes, each one hitting the ground and blooming into a white rose. "I forgot," she whispered. "I was supposed to guard love's transformative power, not corrupt it. But the pain, the rejection, was terrible." Amara's voice rang out suddenly, startling them all. She was human again, though she still held Vipera in her arms. "But it didn't make you less worthy of love. It made you stronger, capable of understanding love's deepest truths." Vipera's serpentine form was melting away, revealing not the bitter Madame Viper, but a woman with eyes full of ancient wisdom and newfound peace. The crown of snakes around her head transformed into a circlet of golden roses. "You've reminded me of my true purpose," she said softly. "Love's guardian should understand that real love transforms us all, not through curses, but through growth. She touched Amara's cheek gently. You were willing to remain transformed forever, not to break the curse, but to spare others pain. That is love's purest form. She stepped back, raising her arms. The garden burst into bloom around them, dead roses returning to life more beautiful than before. By the power vested in me as love's guardian, I bless this union. May your love continue to transform you both, not through magic, but through daily acts of courage and sacrifice. Dawn broke over Eldrup Manor, painting the sky in colors of rose and gold. In the garden, under an arch of renewed roses, Xavier and Amara finally spoke their vows. The village gathered around them, including Elder Martha, who smiled knowingly, and little Lucy, who scattered rose petals with joyful abandon. Vipera stood at the back of the crowd, no longer a queen of serpents, but a guardian of love's transformative power. She watched as the couple kissed, sealing their vows with a love deeper and wiser than before. Do you regret it? Lucy asked, coming to stand beside her. Giving up your revenge? Vipera smiled, touching the golden roses that now crowned her head. How can I regret trading bitterness for beauty? Besides, she added with a wink, some transformations are worth embracing. As Xavier and Amara danced their first dance as husband and wife, rose petals swirled around them like blessing. They had learned what Vipera had forgotten, and then remembered that love's greatest power lies not in maintaining perfection, but in transforming through sacrifice, growing through challenges, and choosing each other anew with every change life brings. The manor's gardens bloomed year-round after that, and visitors sometimes spoke of seeing a beautiful woman in the rose arbor, her crown of golden flowers glowing in the twilight. She became known as the guardian of love's changes, helping those struggling with transformation to find beauty in their new forms. And if anyone in Elderbrook wondered why the local school now included lessons on the transformative power of love, or why there was always a snake-patterned ribbon woven through the bride's bouquet at every wedding, well, some changes become the sweetest traditions of all.